Well, now to the threat from the bottom of the boat. The months-long closure of the Strait of Hormuz may be creating an unexpected new threat to marine ecosystems around the world. An international group of marine scientists say more than 1,500 commercial ships were left stranded or idling in the region during peak marine growth season. Their hulls have been colonized by algae, barnacles, and other marine organisms. Many of those ships have now sailed out of Hormuz, and the researchers warn they could carry invasive species to ports across Asia, Europe, and beyond. The consequences could include damage to fisheries, disruption of local ecosystems, and costly problems for ports and coastal infrastructure. Scientists are calling it a potential biological super spreader event. Well, joining me now is Mario Tamburi. He's a marine scientist at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. He's also the lead author on that new report. Mario, it's good to have you with us. Your report warns of a potential biological super spreader event. What exactly is happening to these ships while they sit idle in the Strait of Hormuz?
Yeah, well, while ships sit idle or remain stationary for extended periods of time, they get biofouled. In fact, anytime you put any hard substrate into natural waters, you get the growth of organisms. So you get bacterial film starting that's later colonized by higher organisms like macroalgae and invertebrates, things like barnacles and mussels, and many of those organisms we're familiar with.
Is there anything about the water in the Strait of Hormuz, in that area, that would enable this type of growth on the hulls of these vessels?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we're calling this sort of a worst case scenario for spreading of marine invasive species because you have ships sitting idle during the worst time of year, if you will, when the water is starting to warm up. The strait was closed on February 28th. Spring was just coming on, so you have the increasing temperatures, which leads to marine growth and reproduction. And it stayed closed for several months through the summer as well. So it's the worst time of year for marine growth to take place. There's also hundreds of ships in different locations clustered together, which can spread organisms from each other as well.
And talk to me about the kinds of organisms that your report is warning about.
Well, it's hard to predict who the invader will be or which organisms they are, but it is a wide range, including the microbes. There are possible pathogens, for example, that can be transmitted through fouling on ships that can infect wildlife or even harm things like aquaculture or human health, but all the way up to the larger organisms. One example is the Asian green mussel that's native to the Persian Arabian Gulf region that has been transferred across the world, likely as a biofouling organism. And it's colonized places in Florida, the Caribbean, in South America, and Australia. And these green mussels are displacing native species. They're interfering with commercial operations like clogging of cooling systems of power plants and the like. So they have dramatic impacts on the areas they colonize.
The peak number of stranded vessels around the Strait of Hormuz since the war began, I think that number has come in at more than 1,500 commercial ships. The number today stands about 70. So we're talking about some 1,400 ships have already moved on. So is this super spreader event, is it happening as we speak?
Yeah, unfortunately, it likely is already happening. We're hoping that some of the ships, before they left, were able to clean the biofouling off the side of the ship in a safe and effective way. But the reality is the great majority of the ships had to leave as soon as they could for obvious, human safety and economic reasons. So it's underway. What we're trying to do now is to identify which are the highest risks locations, next ports of call that might be susceptible to invasions, and to prepare those locations to take action to at least reduce or minimize risk.
And what can they do, Mario, if they've got these invasive species that are basically, being anchored in as we speak?
Yeah, so The first thing we really would hope to do is, of course, clean the biofouling before you leave, and that's not possible for the great majority of ships. But then we can also ask the ships, some of them have already left, but ask them to sort of estimate what their fouling loads might be. It could be as simple as looking at the water line to see what's growing there. Is it full of barnacles and algae? Also to monitor fuel consumption. The more fouling there is, the more fuel is used to keep the speeds up because the fouling causes drag. And that gives you an indication of how biofouled the ship might be. So we can get an estimate of which ships are heavily fouled. Then going to the ports of call, we're looking at environmental similarities. So the next port of call that might have a similar temperature and salinity regime as the Arabian Persian Gulf would be of highest risk. Those locations can then perhaps prepare for things like providing cleaning services that can clean the biofouling and capture that debris. They can also institute some early detection for potential invaders to see when there might be an invasion and then take proper action afterwards.
What do you say to people watching who may not be marine biologists and they don't know, obviously, what you know about the ecosystems and how they interact with boats? But people may be thinking, you see ships all the time that are anchored for long periods of time and then they aren't, and then they move around the world. Why are they not part of some type of spreader event?
They are. There's marine organisms that are being moved around the world, growing on size ships all the time. What's unique about this situation is really the sheer number of ships, the size of those ships. Those are typically large tanker and bulk carrier type vessels. The amount of fouling has accumulated during this layup period at the worst time of year. The organisms that we find in the Arabian Persian Gulf too are also, I mentioned, they're tolerant to high temperatures and high salinities, which might make them more robust and more likely to invade new habitats. So it's just a perfect storm. On top of that, these ships really have global reach. They can spread these fouling organisms all across the globe. Of course, Asia and Europe are the highest risks. They're closer, but they can reach the Americas, Australia, and beyond.
What you're really talking about here, too, is, I guess you would call it boat hygiene. And most boats, if I'm reading you correctly, don't get cleaned adequately or as often as they should. So we're always posing a threat to ecosystems, aren't we, every time we have vessels in the water?
Well, to some extent, but all ships have marine coatings or anti-fouling coatings, paints on the side of the ships that minimizes the growth of these organisms. Those coatings typically have biocides like copper compounds in them that are toxic to the biofouling organisms. They work fairly well and they keep the ships fairly clean because, again, the ships don't want to be fouled. It causes all sorts of operational issues, including more fuel usage. But those coatings are really work well when the ship is moving and operating normally, where they spend maybe a day or two in port doing cargo operations when they move on. When they sit more than a few days, in this case a few months, the coatings are not very effective, and then they get overwhelmed by the marine growth. So it's a unique situation to be stationary for this long, this close together under these conditions.
Okay. Mario, good talking with you. I think the lesson is keep your boats clean and also keep them moving in the waters as much as you can. Mario Tamberi at the University of Maryland, we appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.